Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of The Usual Place. Now today we're going to get well versed in verse, the Voluntary Early Redevelopment Scheme, where owners of flats aged 70 years and older will be able to vote on whether the government should buy back their homes before their leases run out. Now, Minister for National Development, Chee Hong-tat, dropped the news a couple of days ago. So it's something that a lot of homeowners have been waiting to hear about, especially as the clock keeps ticking on those 99-year leases. Now, to figure out whether to verse or not to verse, I'm joined by my colleague and land use reporter, Keng Gene, who covers housing as well, and Christine Sun, the chief researcher and strategist at Reliant Group, a real estate company. Thank you guys for being here.
Hello.
Hi. Okay. So I want to start out just to give the audience and the people listening to us a refresher. Before we get into the hows and whys of the scheme, can you tell me what do we absolutely need to know about first? Maybe Keng Gene, because you wrote the story. What do we need to know about first?
I think whatever you said so far actually has covered what we know about it. That they're going to be selected precincts aged 70 years and up, where residents can choose whether or not they want to go for early redevelopment. That's as much as we know at the moment. We also know that there's VERS and SERS, and in terms of SERS, owners were getting paid compensated market value. We know that VERS compensation isn't going to be as generous, but I think that's as far as we know for now.
Okay, so we'll get into SERS in a little bit, which is the Selective En bloc redevelopment scheme, right? And we call that SERS. Christine, do you want to tell us what else we need to know about VERS at the moment?
As the name suggests, the verse means that it's voluntary. So maybe to give a bit of a perspective, I think it's good to maybe compare SERS and verse. So maybe I'll jump at that.
Okay, let's get into that first then.
Yeah,
okay.
Because so people understand like what's the difference between SERS and verse. Okay, so if you look at SERS, as the name suggests, is that it's selective. So that means that not all flats will be eligible. That means eligible to be selected for redevelopment. So from what we understand is that the percentage is actually not very high, maybe about 5% of the total housing population. And I understand that from, I think in the past to now, there were only about 80 projects that undergone SERS. So that means there'll be a good 95% that will not go through SERS. Whereas for VERS, we do expect this number to be much higher because I think the other thing that we want to see is that the purpose of SERS and VERS is very different. Because if you look at SERS, most of the time when they select certain flats to be redeveloped, it could be because there's a redevelopment potential in that certain location. Maybe because the land is not maximized, or it could be sitting in a very good location that you need to really maybe demolish the flats because to make way for maybe an MRT station or MRT line.
So it's not really about the age of the flat. When it comes
yes,
to VERS?
correct.
That may not be the main consideration.
Correct.
Okay.
Whereas for VERS, it's put in place because they want to address the issue of lease decay. So that means that, when they put this down, the areas, I suppose, may not even, perhaps they may include areas that may not be like, let's say, the prime areas or even locations that may not be maybe high on redevelopment, because I think the perspective is very different. Probably the government will want to help as many people as possible. So because of that, we do expect like the terms to be quite different. But when they offer SERS, these flats may not be aging because by and large, they are sitting in maybe very good locations. So we expect like maybe some of them could be even 40 years, or 50 years old. Whereas for VERS, they are going to select flats that are much older. That means maybe 70 years. So because of the age of the flat, we do expect the payout, that means the compensation that owners are going to receive will be much less.
So the Minister Chee said he outlined the scheme in very broad terms, and he said that in this term of government, the aim is to develop and flesh out the framework for VERS, right? What is it we don't know yet? So could it be like the number of flats? Because that wasn't shared, right? How many flats, where they're going to be? Keng Gene, do you have some sense of which flats could be selected, which areas?
So on your question of what we don't know about VERS, I think one of the things we don't know yet is how widespread the scheme is going to be. I think that maybe there's an assumption now that everybody who reaches, or every block that reaches age 70 and older qualifies, but that might not be the case. I think we also don't know exactly what the compensation is going to be. And under compensation, in terms of what the new flat will look like, how long the lease is going to be, I think these are factors that people will take into consideration when they decide whether or not to proceed with us. And I think the third thing that also we don't know at the moment is what exactly the voting threshold is going to be. Because ultimately I see VERS as a policy tool to allow the government to do rejuvenation of estates earlier than waiting for a 99-year lease to end. And I think if they want to proceed with rejuvenation early, they're going to have to sweeten the deal for current flat owners to an extent where it's attractive enough for them to want to say, okay, maybe about 70 years, I'm willing to give it up, move somewhere else. Yeah.
So the whole verse thing throws up a lot of questions for me as a homeowner of a kind of older flat. So my flat is about 36 years old, and I'm looking at verse and I'm like, okay, one thing is, why did the government not make this compulsory like SIRS? Christine?
I think that's a very good question, because if you look at how they do SIRS and VERS is very different. I mean, the mentality of the mindset, that people approach this subject, as well as the age of the profile of the owner. Let's say, for example, if you look at SIRS, they're making it compulsory because they know that the compensation will likely be quite attractive, because these flats are still relatively not old. And I think, if I'm not wrong, they are given a certain grant to select another new flat in another area. So we are not very sure if they're going to, allow that to happen for VERS. But for VERS, it will be quite different, because by the time they approach you to do VERS, your flat will be much older. That means you'll be 70 years old. And I assume that many of these residents, by the time the flat reaches their age, they may not be too young, or no. Some of them could even be retirees. So let's say, for example, if you make it compulsory and you're not going to give me a very big sum of money as compensation, then how am I going to buy another flat? Where am I going to shift to? So you have to give the person the option to choose whether you want to stay until the end of the lease, or you want to take this sum of money and perhaps maybe shift somewhere with your children, or you may want to select maybe a public rental flat or any other options. So I guess that could be one big reason why they are not making this compulsory.
So in the sense, sorry, Keng Gene, what are you going to add on?
Well, I guess for SIRS, the one consideration is that it's actually very costly for the government to go ahead with SIRS. And as we've seen through SIRS, most of the flat owners or the leaseholders get a lease top-up, a fresh lease of 99 years, which is quite counterintuitive to why 99-year leases are in place in the first place. And that is to allow for land for future generations and also allow for renewal. Yeah.
Well, the thing that also stood out to me was what Mr Chee did not say which areas would get it, right? And also I think there's it's also unsaid that maybe not all flats will get it. So what happens to all flats that don't get VERS then? Then do residents stay out till the 99-year lease, and then what happens then? Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I think that, let's say, for example, this question may not be maybe so important, let's say, for example, for the first few batches, because when we did a calculation, let's say, for example, like how many VERS, that means how many flats will be eligible for VERS, maybe in the next 15 years, let's say, for example. So we did a quick calculation using HDB data from data.gov. And let's say, for example, if we count backwards, maybe 60 or 70 years old, then maybe you minus away 15 years. So that means the flat is about 45 years old to maybe 60 years old now. And this population of flats is maybe about 170,000 flats. And that means in 15 years' time, these flats will be reaching about 60 or 70 years old. So potentially they may be offered VERS. And this is around 15% of the total housing stock, about 1.14 million. So if you're asking this question, let's say, for example, maybe for next 15 years, we'll see that perhaps many of these flats may be offered VERS. But I think the problem will come in when this number is going to go up. because we know that, government, they ramp up more and more housing later on, especially in the 90s, and then after that, after maybe 2000 and so on. So I guess maybe right now, for our generation, most people may not even be really thinking about this question yet. How is verse going to affect my buying decision? And maybe it may come to that state maybe much later. Yeah.
I think back to the question of what you're asking, right? Whether or not, if we don't go for verse, what happens to us? I think quite simply...
no, it's more like if my block doesn't get chosen. So I don't even have the option to verse, right? Then I guess you just...
I think you live out your 99 year
So what
lease.
happens then? Like, should I plan ahead? I mean, since we're talking about buying decisions, right? How did this whole announcement change things for homeowners now?
Maybe I'll just give a very brief background about what happened, because I went to do a quick research, and I found that all these things happened is because there was one stage where many people were paying quite high prices for
the old
older
flats, right? Yeah,
Yes.
I think in Tiong Bahru,
Correct.
and then it was like the $1 million, and then
and that becomes an issue because a lot of people were going for the so-called lottery effect. They thought that they can get SIRS, so maybe not only they get a sum of money, they get to maybe buy a newer flat and at a good price, with certain grants. So and what happened was that I think in 2017, that's when then Minister for MND, I think he said that not all flats will go through SIRS, and then there was also then quite a bit of a discussion about what's going to happen. And I went to see the property price index, and after the announcement, we did see that prices, they did come down and stagnate for about 3 years. And then things got better after a pandemic, and especially after they announced that they have VERS. So, I feel that that is the background of why, they have to come out to say that they are going to do something about VERS, because after they did, the announcement that, not every flat will have SIRS, that's when a lot of homeowners were very worried about what's going to happen, Yes.
Actually, one of the interesting things I saw online was people saying, you got to accept that lease decay is real. Not lease decay, sorry, the 99-year lease is a real thing. The government will take it back.
Yeah, it absolutely should be a real thing.
Okay. At some point, I did think that because there were so many flats, they would just extend the lease. But that's probably me being naive, because with VERS now, they're saying this is surety, right? Like they're making sure that they're telling you that 99-year lease will happen, right? So, Keng Gene, your thoughts about, how this changes buyer insight, or whether will people avoid older flats now?
I feel like we are actually in an unprecedented situation because we don't have flats that are 70 years old. I think the oldest flats we have are perhaps in their early 60s. And so it's a bit difficult to say like, the market sentiment has really changed that much, because we haven't seen flats that are 70 years old being sold on the resale market. What we do know is that at the moment, flats that are the oldest, whether in terms of the block completion date or in terms of the lease start date, these are still being traded on the resale market. And I think one of the classes is in Commonwealth Close. As far as I checked, within the last year, there was still close to about 50 transactions. So just based on what the market tells us so far, without knowing the details of VERS, there's still a demand for such flats, for older flats within the resale market. Yeah.
Maybe I add on. What we did was that yesterday I went to look at the pricing, in terms of older flats. So what I found out is that from HDB data is that, yes, you are right. That in fact, I feel that the announcement of VERS is actually quite good, because after they announced the VERS, there was actually a spike in terms of demand for older flats. So let's say, for example, older flats, we define them as maybe 40 years and older in terms of lease. So when we look at the transactions, maybe around, because just now I mentioned that they started this whole conversation about 2017. So if you look at the transactions before 2017, like maybe 2016, there were about 1,500 older flats that were transacted in 2016. So for the whole year, these are the older flats, let's say, for example, 40 years and above. And if you fast forward to, let's say, for example, last year, 2024, this number actually went up to, if I'm not wrong, around 6,000. So it shows that, even when there's so much conversation about lease decay and all this, after they announced the VERS, and even with not much details, we see that by and large, people are actually quite open to buying these older flats. And if you talk about in terms of pricing, I think it's also quite surprising for me when I look at maybe like, for example, those older flats, maybe 40 years and above, and they are sold at maybe higher price points. Let's say example, like maybe more than 800,000. And again, you know, if you look at, let's say, before the pandemic, averagely maybe about 50 of these units, old flats, fetch about 800,000 and above. But if, let's say, for example, if you look at last year, if I'm not wrong, there were about 300 of such flats that were sold above, let's say, 800 over 1,000, and of which around 60 were sold for even more than $1 million. Yeah. So I guess that, you know, I think this verse, to me, I feel that at least there is some sort of exit strategy. That means it gives an option to buyers. Let's say, for example, if you really don't want to live until the end of the lease, you know, at least you can select for verse, which is an alternative.
So, since you're talking about buying and selling, how will this affect prices in a very, you know, hot market at the moment? Do you think it's a kind of like a cooling measure in a way? In a way, or will newer flats be more attractive now with longer leases? So prices for those, will those go up significantly? What would you think?
Well, of course, I think what you're asking is maybe because of, you know, concerns about these aging flats. That's why more people will go for the younger flats. I would think that because if you're talking about HDB housing, I mean, public housing is talking about more than 1 million flats. So there are many different types of buyers out there. So from what I illustrated just now, it shows that even with you know, the government pushing out a lot of maybe new BTO flats or even sale of balance flats, you see that demand for even older flats are there, because there will always be people who they don't mind paying slightly a bit more for these older flats, because usually many of these older flats are in mature estates, big units, so they are very comfortable. And in fact, some people, after they, let's say for example, they sell their private properties, they get a sum of money and they can pay off the whole, older flat, the purchase price. So if we talk about, let's say, for example, right now with the verse, after they announce, does it have a very major impact on prices? I did see that after they did the announcement on verse some years back, there was an increase in terms of demand as well as prices. But that could also be because overall HDB resale prices have been moving. But if you talk about price growth, it's still slower than newer flats.
Okay. I wanted to go back to something that Keng Gene wrote earlier this week, which was a news analysis following the announcement, right? And I think there's a social element to this first project. So it's not just about aging, lease decay, because what was in your news analysis was that people stay together, and then it's multi-generational families that happen together. It's not just older people who are in their flats, right? So when you hit 99 years or you hit 70 and then you get the option to verse, there are still people who are younger who may outlive the flat, right? So can you talk more about your news analysis about, you know, the compensation part that people might expect, and how it can cater for, what can be done to cater for, you know, the other younger generation who live there and now have to move, or they have to live out the 99 years? What were some of the analysts saying, and what was your take?
Well, I think when you're looking at the social element or the social impact of us, actually, it might be beneficial to take even further step back. So if you're looking at, like, on a neighborhood level, if you have redevelopment projects, there's going to be some disamenities to residents. And then the verse also includes this element of voting, right? And we don't know the threshold yet, but assuming it's just impossible that you're going to get, I don't think you're going to get into a situation where you have 100% agreement that let's go for verse. So inevitably, there are going to be some leaseholders who want to live out their current leases and stay in their homes until the end of the 9 years. And assuming that the threshold is hit and they are forced to move, then verse doesn't become voluntary for them anymore. And how can we as a sort of society deal or manage the expectations or feelings of these people? I think that calls
home,
for,
right? And then you are asked to leave.
Yes, and I think that calls for some empathy, both from a policymaker's perspective as well as fellow residents, as fellow neighbours. And then, like you said, there also we do not yet know the details of what replacement flats will look like. But just going by trends and going by how newer flats are generally smaller than those that are a few decades old, there's a possibility that multi-generational families in a household in a bigger flat now will be offered something smaller. And I think that causes, or that factors into considerations as well in terms of whether or not to take up verse. And what some of the policy observers were saying, that perhaps this is an opportunity to see if there's a differential treatment for these kind of families in terms of offering them maybe 2 units. Yeah.
Christine, you want to add on?
I think if you talk about, let's say, for example, just now he mentioned about the voting. I think this will be something that is very interesting to watch, because if you look at the equivalent of this kind of voting, it will be like maybe the collective sales in the private market.
Yeah, it's like which we have seen it can go on and on,
Yes,
right? And then people get
correct.
angry, and then they will be upset with their neighbours.
Yes.
So in my mind, that could kind of cause some discord. If I'm living in my HDB block and then I want to do verse and then you don't want to do verse, then how?
So my thinking, let's say for example, like, it's already such a complicated process when you do it for maybe a private property project. So can you imagine you do it like a whole precinct or even like a few blocks within an estate?
Yeah.
So my guess is that perhaps they may consider maybe lowering the threshold, maybe to be slightly lower than 80%. I don't know. Yeah.
Or do you think they will redo the vote? If first year you say no, right? And first year they don't get the necessary to go ahead with us, and then like 2 years later the block sees like their neighbours all of us. Do you think that could be a possibility of a recount? Revote.
Yeah, it means they will just continue to vote and vote,
Until, because it would be interesting. Yeah, Keng Gene, you were going to say?
Well, I think just generally speaking, I think there's a possibility that as blocks age, people's or residents' perceptions of whether or not they still want to continue all the way to the end might change. Yeah, but that also remains to be seen. And whether it's a one-off offer, you don't take it up this time, never again, you just live out the 9 years, I think also is something that the policymakers have to consider.
Actually, some people might say, I don't mind living out the 9 years because they will do HIP 2, is that?
Yes.
HIP 2, which is just upgrading when it hits that certain age, like 70 or
about 60,
about
so 2/3 true. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a more intensive HIP from what I understand, and then they'll just reinforce and make sure the building is livable. So you could want to live out till 99.
I mean, I'm just trying to fast forward maybe 50 years time when we start seeing some of these things happening. Because right now we keep thinking about the older flats, maybe flats that our grandmother or grandparents or great-grandparents, they live in. But if let's say you fast forward the time, I'm just thinking if let's say one day when Duxton, let's say Pinnacle at Duxton goes for verse, so I believe that, maybe different profile of maybe different types of housing, you could see like maybe higher vote, that means votes, and maybe certain areas that may not be so popular and they want to exit the market. So you may see more people voting for verse. Yeah, because like for example, imagine places like even right now they are selling like the new flats in Greater Southern Waterfront, maybe the ones in let's say Toa Payoh. Some of these are very good locations. Yeah, so I believe that many people, even if the flats are going to be older, they may want to continue to stay on. Yeah, so I mean, if you're asking like what is the kind of impact on buyers now, so I don't know whether, if things are not said so clearly, so, when you're trying to see, should I buy at Mount Pleasant or should I buy at, let's say, for example, maybe somewhere slightly further like Sembawang or even a new area in Chencharu, we should have a higher chance of, getting verse. Yeah, I don't think people have thought about it so far, but I think it'll be interesting thing to think about.
I mean, I will confess that the only time I thought about verse is this week. Actually, they made the announcement. Actually, PM Lee made the announcement in 2018, right? So it's been about 7 years. And correct me if I'm wrong, Keng Gene, because you're the expert on this. There has been no major announcement till now about it. I mean, interestingly, is there a reason? Do we know why they decided to do that? Because actually the project doesn't start till the 2030s, right? So do you have some sense of why Mr Chee decided to announce it now?
It's difficult to say for sure. I think one thing to note was that when then PM Lee announced it in 2018, he said that this was going to take place. I believe the number that he gave was 20 years. So simple math, 2038. Whereas now Mr Chee is saying that the first projects will likely take place in the first half of the next decade, meaning the early 2030s. So assuming that you split that down into 2030 to 2034, there's still a 4-year gap between what was originally said and when they look to be starting the first verse project now. And that tells me that potentially the government wants to get started with estate rejuvenation early. Because like they've said, right, if it's assuming our HDB blocks were built to live for about a century, and you have many blocks hitting that century mark in the 2070s and 2080s, and there's a lot of potential rejuvenation that needs to be done. And so starting on verse projects early in the 2030s, assuming that residents go ahead with it, gives them a bit of a head start. I think also just going back to these dates, we're talking about 2070s, 2080s, and then when verse kicks in at about 70 years old, so 2040s and 2050s is when things start to ramp up. I think the early start gives them time gives the government time to roll out the policy first and then make tweaks if needed, so that when crunch time hits and when more and more flats hit the 70s, the policy will be hopefully in a better state by then than it was when it was first released in the early 2030s.
Should we make anything about how Mr. Chee said that there won't be any more, there are no plans for SIRS at the moment?
So again, looking from the lenses of estate renewal and wanting to rejuvenate estates, I think ultimately, I feel that lease decay is real and that we should take lease decay seriously. And so I see verse as a way of the government creating supply of land so that it can proceed with rejuvenation early. And hence, I alluded to earlier, it's quite important that if they really need the land, then they find a package for verse that is sufficiently attractive for residents to take it on. In the absence of that, I do wonder if SIRS might make a comeback, or if at least that element of compulsory acquisition may come back if the land is really needed that urgently for rejuvenation.
Christine, you think we'll see SIRS ever again?
I mean, okay, let's say, for example, before I address that question, just now you're saying, why is it that they want to address this now? My thoughts is that, actually, to me, as a Singaporean, I feel very confident and happy that they are doing, this plan right now, although we know that the flats that will be eligible for VERS will be maybe just another 10 to 15 years, and the bulk will be after 20 years. I mean, we know that our government is always very forward-looking. So for them to do this process, let's say, for example, just now as we mentioned, the voting and things like that, I think it's going to be very complicated. And you're talking about involving a lot of people with a lot of stakeholders, especially you're talking about aging population. So with older flats, then there'll be many people who may not be having maybe income when they are going to go through VERS. So these are some things that they need a lot of consultation, maybe from maybe the public feedback and all. So to start right now, I think is timely because especially since they are going to look at rejuvenating, it's like almost all over the island. They're going to convert so many areas. So with that in place, they also have to think about what are they going to do with the older flats. So I think it's timely and it's good because it will also comfort. I mean, maybe assure some people who may be very worried about lease decay. And of course, they have to take care of the needs of homeowners who want to sell their flats, both for the younger flats as well as the older flats. So they have to do something about it. So I think at least, like I say, there is an alternative. So they allow you to select whether you want to take it up. So at least there is a choice rather than to allow the lease to just finish and then there's like no other outlet, or no other option. So, but I think you're right. I think most of the Singaporeans right now, probably they may not be thinking about this verse, because just now I was just discussing with my colleagues, I say, imagine because the lease starts when you collect the keys. So imagine you buy the flat, maybe you ballot at 25 or 26 years old, wait 4 years, collect the keys at 30 years old. And when your flat reaches 70, for verse, you'll be 100 years old. So I don't think many people, when they buy their first flat, they'll be thinking about verse, because I think virtually that's not possible. And even when we look at the data, historically from 1995, about more than 50% of the transactions takes place, that means before the flat reaches 30 years old. That means most of people, they will have sold their flats. So if you're talking about, whether when they think about this verse, how it's going to impact them, then I think it will be more for the second-time buyers or third-time buyers. And by then, these people will be much older. So it's something that they will need to think about it. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think for me, I was kind of referencing what happened with SIRS in the Ang Mo Kio, the last one, which they did in 2022, right? And why I was what struck me about the story was that some people didn't have enough money to top up for the replacement flat, in a sense. I don't know if, because and Mr Chee said for verse, the compensation might not be as generous as SIRS, right? So is there like that was the concept for me. I mean, if people have younger family members living in the flat and then now they have to move out, so the flat might outlive me, but the younger generation might not, then what happens to them if they can't top up the money for a new flat? I think that would be my concern if I have family members living with me, which is what we discussed earlier.
I think
right?
by then they probably will look at allowing these people maybe certain priorities or or maybe a higher percentage for people of maybe this category to buy back a BTO flat, which we know that is highly subsidized. I also wanted to make a suggestion that maybe the government can consider, if let's say, for example, if these people are displaced from the verse, maybe they can allow the elderly to maybe stay in the comcare apartments, is it? Yeah, so that could be a possibility, because many of them are older and they may also need all these maybe medical facilities, all the elderly friendly features, So maybe this could also encourage them to go for verse, because you are essentially exchanging your house with maybe, I mean, most of this may not have these kind of elderly friendly features, and if they go for these comcare apartments, then maybe they may instead vote for it. Yeah, so this could be a possibility. Then, like just now, as Keng Gene mentioned, if you go for verse, they could allow maybe 2 options. That means you can try as a second timer for another BTO flat, maybe at a certain location or nearby or whatever. Yeah, so I mean, this could be some correct. Yeah. I believe that I mean, personally, I don't think that, we know how the government, usually how they treat Singaporeans, they will not leave people homeless. So I believe that even when they do this verse, they will have some backup plan, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, Keng Gene, you're going to say?
No, I think, well, verse or not, the situation that you painted for us just now, 99 years is 99 years. And so if you have a second generation who's going to take over the flat and live out that 30 years, either way they would have had to plan for life beyond 99. I think that's a reality. And even if we choose, let's say if a precinct chooses to verse versus one that is offered the option but doesn't take it up, those who don't take it up shouldn't be worse off. They should still be able to continue living through their 99 years, and either way, they're going to have to consider what to do at the end of that lease anyway. Yeah, so I don't think that verse necessarily should factor into their considerations as much, as far as 99 years is concerned. Yeah.
Okay, so when people watch this podcast in 2045, which is 20 years later, so the big question is, to verse or not to verse? After all that we discussed, what do you think?
I think attend the public consultations when they open in the next 5 years. Because I feel like there's a lot of perhaps apprehension and confusion around policy. A lot of things have not been made clear to us yet. And hopefully by the time the early 2030s come around, much of this will have been answered. Yeah.
Well, for me, I feel that it will depend on the where you're staying, the type of flat, and also maybe your income level. Because let's say, for example, let's say this is a second time or third time buyer, and you still have the means to get some income. So maybe to vote for verse, you get some money, you can buy another place. But let's say, for example, if you are older and you are maybe a retiree, then because we do know that the elderly single population is actually going up. So some of these people, they may even outlive their siblings. So that one, then maybe the authorities will then have to think about what is the kind of alternative. Like just now I mentioned, is it going to be Comcare apartment, maybe rental, public rental flats? So these are some things to consider. Then of course, maybe to put ourselves, forward to think about, the type of flats also make a difference. Let's say, for example, if I'm staying in, let's say I'm just imagine, I'm the one that bought, like, let's say, in the Greater Southern Waterfront or Mount Pleasant, where we expect that, the construction process or the type of flats, I suppose the materials that they use, the way they're going to do it, likely these flats are going to last maybe beyond 99 years. So it makes sense that, let's say, for example, I will not take up the verse and then I continue staying in these very well located flats. But if you're talking about, you're now staying in maybe a really very much older flat that has been built like, in the 1970s or 80s, where the process is not that great, materials is not that great. And when it comes to the decay, it's quite difficult to maybe to continue living in even that area, because there's only so much that they can do for, let's say, HIP1 and HIP2. So, so that I feel is a consideration. So I will feel that maybe as the years go by, perhaps people taking up verse may be lesser than right now. Yeah, because the conditions, the type of flats, the location, imagine you're staying like at the MRT station, you're almost staying like in a public housing integrated development. Then likely these people will feel that, hey, actually my house still quite sturdy. So I'll just continue to stay until the end. And in fact, if there's some more, and I'm not around, I may want to pass on, to my next generation. So I guess when we think about verse and SIRS, I would encourage homeowners and even buyers to think long term, to think about, because when they put in place these kind of policies, I believe it will not be short term. It will affect a lot of flats. It will come like many, many years down the road. So, although there could be a lot of apprehension about verse and all, but I guess that eventually I think things will work out. And I'm quite positive. Like now you see all the new flats coming up. Yeah, it's so beautiful. So why not continue to stay on,
Well, on that note, Christine, Keng Gene, thank you very much for your thoughts and your insight into verse. So that's it from the usual place. Hopefully you'll watch this again in 20 years when the verse happens, and then you'll tell us what your decision is. Now, if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you won't miss the next episode. And if you have thoughts on the scheme, do drop a comment on YouTube or talk to me on Instagram at The Usual Place Podcast. I'll see you next week on Thursday.